A waitress was fired for showing a biker kindness. By sunrise, 200 Hells Angels were waiting. The clock above the counter read 6:30 when Lena Brooks pushed through the back door of the Highway Star Diner, tying her apron behind her back with hands that already ached from the morning's dishes at her apartment sink. She had done laundry before her shift, scrubbing her one spare uniform in the tub because the washer in her building had been broken for 3 weeks, and she could not afford the laundromat this week. Her feet already hurt. Her shift had not even started. The diner sat along Route 9, a long stretch of highway that connected 2 bigger towns, and most nights it filled with truckers and travelers passing through on their way to somewhere better. The building itself was tired-looking, with a flickering sign out front that spelled Highway Star in red letters, though the S had been dark for over a year. Inside, the linoleum floor was cracked near the entrance, and the booths were patched with silver tape in places where the vinyl had split open. But Lena had worked here for 4 years, and despite everything wrong with the place, she loved it in the quiet way a person loves something familiar. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. She grabbed her order pad and clipped her name tag onto her apron, the plastic rectangle that read Lena in faded letters. Carl, the owner, sat in his usual spot behind the register, counting the drawer and not looking up when she walked past. "You're here," he said, which was as close to a greeting as he ever gave her. "I'm here," Lena answered, and went to check on her tables. The dinner rush came in waves. She refilled coffee cups before they were even half empty, a habit she had built over years of watching tired truckers nurse their cups because they could not afford a second one. She remembered that Mr. Dooley in Booth 4 liked extra cream, and that the young couple by the window were celebrating their anniversary, so she brought them a slice of pie on the house and told Carl she had marked it as a mistake in the kitchen. Around 8, an older man came in wearing a thin jacket that had clearly seen too many winters. He ordered only coffee, said he was not hungry, but Lena saw the way his eyes lingered on the menu, on the burger platter photo taped to the laminated page. When she brought his coffee, she also brought a plate of eggs and toast. "I didn't order this," he said. "Kitchen mixed it up," Lena told him, even though she had made the order herself and paid for it out of her own tip jar money. "No sense letting it go to waste." The man's eyes softened, and he thanked her in a voice that cracked just slightly, and Lena felt that familiar warmth in her chest, the one that came whenever she managed to make someone's night a little easier. It did not matter that her own refrigerator at home held little more than eggs and a half carton of milk. It did not matter that her car needed new brakes she could not pay for. Somehow taking care of other people made her own troubles feel smaller, at least for a little while. By 10 o'clock, the rain had started outside, tapping lightly against the windows. By 11, it had turned into something heavier, a real storm rolling in off the mountains, the kind that made the old diner's windows rattle in their frames. The last customers trickled out, waving goodbye to Lena as they dashed to their cars, and soon she was alone, wiping down the counters and flipping the chairs up onto the tables for the night. She glanced toward the window. The rain came down in sheets now, lit up gold and silver whenever a car passed on the highway outside. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, low and rumbling, and Lena felt an uneasy twist in her stomach. She thought about anyone who might be out on the road tonight, caught in weather like this, driving on those old mountain curves where the guardrails were rusted thin. She hoped, whoever they were, that they made it somewhere safe soon. A light swept across the front window, cutting through the rain like a knife through fog. Lena looked up from the counter, rag still in her hand, and watched a single headlight grow brighter as it turned off the highway and into the gravel lot. A motorcycle. out in this storm. She set the rag down slowly, her heart giving a small, nervous thump. Nobody rode a motorcycle in weather like this unless something was very wrong. The engine cut off, and for a moment there was only the sound of rain hammering the roof and the wind pushing against the old walls of the diner. Then the door opened. A man stepped inside, and the wind followed him, rattling the little bell above the door so hard it sounded like it might fall off its hook. He was big, broad through the shoulders, wearing a leather jacket that dripped rainwater onto the cracked linoleum floor. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and a thick beard clung wet against his jaw. Patches covered his jacket, worn and faded, the kind Lena had seen on television but never up close. He looked like trouble. He looked like the kind of man Carl would have thrown out before he even got both feet through the door. But Lena noticed something else first. His right hand. He held it close to his body, and blood ran down his knuckles in a thin red line, dripping onto the floor in small, quiet drops. His face was pale, and his eyes, when they found hers, were not hard or mean like she expected. They were tired, scared even, in a way that did not match his size or his leather jacket or the heavy boots he wore. "Sorry," he said, his voice rough like gravel. "I saw your light on. I didn't mean to scare anybody." "You're bleeding," Lena said, already moving toward him before she could stop herself. "I'm fine." He looked toward the door, like he might just turn around and walk back into the storm. "Sit down," Lena said, and something in her voice must have surprised him, because he did. He lowered himself onto the stool closest to the door, water pooling beneath his boots, and he held his hand against his chest like he was trying to keep it from anyone's notice. Lena grabbed the first aid kit from behind the counter, the same one Carl complained about restocking every few months, and she knelt in front of the man, taking his hand gently into hers. The cut ran across his knuckles, deep enough to need stitches, probably, but she cleaned it as best she could, wrapping gauze around it with careful, practiced hands. He watched her the whole time, saying nothing, like he could not quite believe what was happening. "What's your name?" Lena asked. "Wade," he said. "Wade Mercer." "I'm Lena." She finished tying off the gauze and looked up at him. "You want some coffee, Wade? You look like you could use it." He hesitated, glancing toward the register where the menu sat, and something in his face shifted, a flicker of shame crossing his tired features. "I don't have any money," he admitted quietly. "Wallet's gone. Lost it somewhere back on the highway, I think. Or maybe it fell out when I was checking my bike a few miles back. I don't even know anymore." "I didn't ask if you had money," Lena said. "I asked if you wanted coffee." She poured a cup, without waiting for his answer, set it down in front of him, along with a small plate of toast she buttered quickly in the kitchen. Wade wrapped both hands around the mug, like it was the only warm thing he had felt in hours. And maybe it was. "Thank you," he said, and the words came out low, almost like he was not used to saying them. Lena leaned against the counter across from him, studying his face in the dim light of the diner. He was clearly exhausted, the kind of exhausted that came from more than just a long ride. His eyes kept drifting toward the door, toward the storm outside, like he was looking for something out there in the dark. "You want to tell me why you're out riding in weather like this?" Lena asked gently. "Alone, no less. Something must be pretty important to have you out here soaked to the bone at midnight." Wade wrapped his good hand tighter around the mug, staring down into the coffee like the answer to her question might be floating somewhere in it. "There's a girl," he said finally. 15 years old. Name's Emily." Lena stayed quiet, letting him find his words. She had learned a long time ago that some people needed silence more than questions. She's been in foster care since she was little, Wade went on. Bounced around a lot. Our club, we run a program. Been doing it for years. We watch out for kids in the system. Not in any official way. Nothing with paperwork or badges. We just show up. Fix their bikes if they got any. Bring food to the houses that need it. Let them know somebody's paying attention, even when it feels like nobody is. He looked up at her then, and his eyes were wet, though Lena couldn't tell if it was from the rain or something else. Emily's been in a rough placement the last few months. Bad people running that house. I found out 3 days ago they'd been treating her worse than the paperwork let on. I went to check on her Tuesday and she was gone. Just gone. Nobody's seen her since. You think she ran away? Lena said. I know she did. Wade's jaw tightened. She's smart. Smarter than most grown folks I know. If she ran, she had a reason, and she probably planned it. But it's been raining for 2 days straight, and she's out there somewhere with nothing, and I promised her. His voice cracked on the last word. I promised her I'd never let anything happen to her, and now she's gone and I can't find her. Lena set down her rag and came around the counter, kneeling in front of him again, checking the bandage on his hand, even though it didn't need it. She just needed something to do with her hands while she thought. How'd you cut yourself? She asked. Fell off the bike checking a drainage ditch outside of town. Thought I saw something. Wasn't her. He shook his head. It's been a long 2 days. Lena stood and went to the kitchen window, calling back an order to nobody, out of habit, before she remembered the kitchen was empty, and she was the only one there. She fixed 2 plates herself, eggs and bacon, and a thick slice of bread fried in butter, the kind of meal that stuck to your ribs and made you feel like somebody was looking out for you. She wrapped both plates in wax paper and set them in front of Wade. Eat something, she said. You're not going to find her if you fall off your bike from hunger, too. Wade looked at the plates, then at her, like he wanted to argue but didn't have the strength for it. He unwrapped one and started eating slowly, like his body had forgotten how. When I was a kid, Lena said, leaning against the counter, things weren't easy at home. My mom had a hard time keeping things together. There were nights I didn't want to be found. I used to hide in places nobody would think to look. Wade stopped chewing and looked up at her. There was an old grain silo behind the Baptist church on Route 9. Nobody used it anymore, but the door still worked if you knew how to jiggle the lock just right. I used to sit in there for hours. Lena's eyes went distant, remembering. There was also a culvert under the train tracks past the Miller farm, big enough to stand up in if you were small, dry mostly, even when it rained. And there's an old boarded-up gas station about 6 miles down from here, the one with the busted pumps. Kids used to sneak in through a broken window on the side. Wade set down his fork. Say that again, the boarded-up one. The gas station? It's not far. Maybe 6 miles east on the old highway, before you hit the bridge. That's close to where I found her hood, Wade said, more to himself than to Lena. She left a sweatshirt hanging on the fence a mile up from there. I thought it meant she was heading toward town, but maybe she was heading back. Lena felt something stir in her chest, a small flicker of hope she hadn't expected. Scared kids don't always run far, she said quietly. Sometimes they just run to the nearest place that feels like it might keep them hidden. Wade stood up so fast, his chair scraped against the tile floor. He grabbed his jacket off the back of the booth, still damp from the rain, and pulled it on over his broad shoulders. I need to go check that gas station, he said. Right now, before the sun comes up. Lena nodded, wrapping another piece of bread in wax paper and pushing it into his hands. Take this, in case you find her and she's hungry. Wade looked down at the small bundle like it weighed more than it should have. Why are you doing all this? He asked. You don't know me. You don't know her. I walked in here soaked and bleeding and you didn't even blink. Lena shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Somebody was kind to me once, back when I needed it and didn't expect it. I guess I never forgot what that felt like." Wade studied her for a long moment, like he was trying to memorize her face. "I won't forget this," he said. "Whatever happens tonight, I won't forget it." Then he was out the door, his boots splashing through puddles in the parking lot. A few seconds later, Lena heard his motorcycle roar to life, the sound cutting through the quiet morning like thunder rolling away from town. She watched the single headlight shrink into the darkness until it disappeared over the hill, heading east toward Route 9 and the old gas station with the broken window. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The sky outside the window was still black, but Lena knew from years of opening the diner that sunrise wasn't far off. She had maybe 2 hours before Carl showed up to start the morning shift. She turned back to the diner, empty now except for the hum of the refrigerator and the drip of the coffee pot cooling on its burner. The booth where Wade had sat was a mess. Wet footprints trailed across the floor. A used bandage wrapper sat crumpled on the table. Lena got to work. She always felt better with something to do with her hands, and tonight was no different. She wiped down the counter until it shined. She swept the floor, catching bits of mud and gravel that had fallen off Wade's boots. She refilled the napkin holders and straightened the sugar packets in their little metal tray. The way Carl liked them, even though Carl was never around early enough to notice. By the time gray light started creeping through the windows, the diner looked like nothing had happened at all. No sign of the storm, the biker, or the missing girl somewhere out there in the wet morning. Just an ordinary diner, waiting for another ordinary day. Lena felt tired down in her bones, the kind of tired that came from carrying somebody else's worry along with her own. But she also felt something else, something lighter. She had done something. Maybe it was small. Maybe it didn't matter in the end. But she had given a scared man some food and a little bit of hope, and that had to count for something. She was pouring herself a cup of coffee, finally allowing herself a moment to sit, when the bell above the door jingled. Carl Dawson walked in, keys jangling in his hand, his eyes already scanning the room the way they always did, looking for something wrong. He found it fast. His gaze landed on the empty plates stacked in the sink, still smeared with egg yolk and bacon grease. 2 plates. 2 meals nobody had paid for. His eyes moved to the register, then back to Lena, and his face went hard as stone. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice already sharp enough to cut. Lena set down her mug. "There was a man. He was hurt and hungry. I helped him." "You gave away food," Carl said, each word landing like a slap. "My food, without paying for it." "He didn't have any money, Carl. He was soaked through and bleeding. I couldn't just... I don't care what he was." Carl's voice rose, loud enough that a few early customers who had just walked in glanced over, forks pausing halfway to their mouths. "This is a business, not a charity. You don't get to give away what isn't yours." "It was 2 plates of food," Lena said, her voice trembling now despite herself. "It's not going to bankrupt us." "It's not about the money," Carl snapped, though everyone in the room could tell it was exactly about the money. "It's about respect. You don't get to make decisions like that without asking me first." He grabbed a cardboard box from behind the counter and shoved it toward her. "Pack your things," he said. "You're done here." The words hung in the air like they didn't belong to anybody real. Lena stood there for a second, waiting for Carl to take them back, to say he was joking, to say something that made sense. He didn't. He just stood there with the cardboard box stretched out between them, his jaw set tight, his eyes daring her to argue. She didn't argue. She took the box. The few customers who had wandered in early stared down at their menus, at their coffee cups, at anything that wasn't Lena's face. Nobody said a word. Nobody stood up for her. She moved behind the counter one last time, gathering up the things that belonged to her: a hairbrush, a spare pair of shoes, a photograph of her and her mother taken years ago, the corners soft and worn from being touched too many times. She placed each item into the box like it was made of glass. Carl didn't look at her again. He had already turned toward the register, counting the drawer like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just thrown away 3 years of her showing up early and staying late, and never once complaining. Lena walked out the front door of the Highway Star Diner with the box under one arm and her purse under the other. The bell jingled behind her, the same cheerful sound it always made, like it didn't know what had just happened inside. Outside, the sky had turned the color of an old bruise, purple and gray, the sun still hiding somewhere behind the hills. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the parking lot slick and shining under the one working street lamp. Lena walked to the curb at the edge of the lot and sat down, setting the box beside her feet. She didn't cry. She thought she might, but the tears didn't come. Instead, she just felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside her chest and left nothing behind but a dull ache. 3 years. She had given this diner 3 years of her life. She had memorized the way old Mrs. Fenwick liked her eggs, over easy with the yolk barely runny. She had learned to sneak extra pancakes to the truckers, who looked like they hadn't eaten a real meal in days. She had stayed past midnight more times than she could count, helping close up, never once asking for overtime pay because she knew Carl would just say no anyway. And in one single moment, all of it was gone. Because she gave 2 plates of food to a man who needed it more than the diner needed the money. She wrapped her arms around her knees and stared out at the empty road, watching the street lamp flicker against the wet asphalt. Somewhere out there, Wade was riding through the dark, searching for a girl who probably felt just as forgotten as Lena did right now. She wondered if he'd found anything yet. She wondered if the girl was cold, or scared, or hungry. She hoped, at least, that her small act of kindness had done some good for somebody, even if it had cost her everything. Meanwhile, miles down Route 9, Wade guided his motorcycle off the main road and onto a gravel path that curled behind an old gas station, the one Lena had mentioned, the one with the broken window and the rusted pumps that hadn't worked in years. He climbed off his bike and walked the grounds slowly, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, searching every shadow, every doorway, every place a frightened girl might hide. Nothing. The gas station was empty except for broken glass and old newspapers soaked through with rain. Wade stood there for a moment, frustration building in his chest. He thought about what Lena had told him, about the places she used to hide when she was young and scared. An old bus, a shed behind a building, anywhere quiet enough that nobody would think to look. He remembered her mentioning something else, almost as an afterthought. Behind the diner property, past the tree line, there was an old bus that had been sitting abandoned for years, forgotten by whoever used to own it. Wade got back on his bike and rode towards the diner, cutting through a side road that curved behind the building. The engine growled low as he came to a stop near a cluster of trees, and there, half hidden behind overgrown weeds and broken branches, sat the shape of an old school bus, its paint faded and peeling, windows fogged with years of dust and grime. Wade cut the engine and climbed off slowly. He walked toward the bus, his boots crunching over gravel and wet leaves, his flashlight beam sweeping across the rusted metal door hanging slightly open on its hinges. Wade pulled the door open, the hinges screaming in the quiet night. He pointed his flashlight inside, and the beam landed on a pile of old blankets shoved against the back seats. The blankets moved. Wade froze. He kept his voice low and steady, the way he would talk to a spooked animal. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "My name's Wade. I'm looking for a girl who might be scared and cold and hiding somewhere she thinks nobody will find her." The blankets moved again. A face peeked out, pale and streaked with dirt, eyes wide with fear. A girl, maybe 15 or 16, her hair matted, her lips cracked from the cold. "Please don't take me back there," she whispered. "Please, I'll do anything. Just don't make me go back." Wade lowered himself down slowly, getting on one knee so he wasn't looming over her. He set the flashlight down so it wasn't shining directly in her eyes. "Nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go," he said. "Not tonight. I just want to make sure you're safe. That's all?" The girl studied him for a long moment, taking in his leather vest, the patches on his jacket, the gray creeping into his beard. Whatever she saw in his face must have told her something, because she slowly pulled the blanket down from around her shoulders. "I'm hungry," she admitted, her voice small, "and I'm real cold." "I got a jacket you can wear," Wade said, already shrugging out of his own coat. "And I know somebody who's got food and a warm place for you to sit. She's not far from here." The girl hesitated, but the cold and hunger must have won out over her fear, because she let Wade wrap the jacket around her thin shoulders. She climbed out of the bus slowly, her legs shaky from being curled up for who knew how many hours. "What's your name?" Wade asked gently. "Emily," she said. Wade felt something click into place, though he couldn't say what. He helped Emily onto the back of his motorcycle, told her to hold tight, and rode slowly back toward the diner, careful not to go too fast for a scared girl who had never ridden on a bike before. Lena was still sitting on the curb when she heard the engine approaching. She looked up, and her heart lifted a little at the sight of Wade's headlight cutting through the darkness. When the bike stopped, she saw a second figure climbing off, wrapped in Wade's jacket, hair a tangled mess, face streaked with grime. "I found her," Wade said. "Hiding in the old bus, just like you said." Lena stood up, walking closer, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Something about the shape of the girl's face, the way she held her shoulders, tugged at a memory buried deep inside her. "Emily?" Lena whispered, barely able to get the word out. The girl's head snapped up. Her eyes, the same shade of hazel as Lena's own, went wide with shock. "Lena!" The box of Lena's belongings fell from her arms, forgotten, hitting the wet pavement with a soft thud. She stared at the girl in front of her, searching for the little sister she remembered, the one who used to follow her around the house, the one she had been told was living somewhere safe, somewhere better. "They told me you were adopted," Lena said, her voice cracking. "They told me you had a family. A good one." Emily's chin trembled. "The adoption didn't work out. I got sent back. Then I went to another home and another, and I kept thinking somebody would tell you where I was. I kept waiting for you to come find me." "I didn't know," Lena said, tears finally breaking free, running down her cheeks. "I swear, Emily, I didn't know. If I had known, I would have come. I would have never stopped looking." Emily's composure crumbled, and she rushed forward, wrapping her arms around Lena's waist, burying her face into her sister's shoulder. Lena held her tight, feeling the thin, shaking frame of the girl she thought she had lost forever. "I thought you forgot about me," Emily sobbed. "I thought nobody wanted me." "I never forgot you," Lena whispered into her hair, rocking her gently. "Not for one single day, I promise you that." Wade stood back a few steps, watching the two sisters cling to each other in the gray light before dawn, feeling the weight of a promise he had made to a scared girl, now settling into something greater than he had imagined. Lena woke up on the thin motel mattress with her whole body aching. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came back to her, piece by piece, like a bad dream sliding back into place. She had no job. She had spent the night sitting on a curb, crying. And somewhere in the next room, wrapped in blankets and finally asleep, was the little sister she thought she had lost forever. Lena sat up slowly and rubbed her eyes. Sunlight leaked through the thin motel curtains, painting a strip of gold across the carpet. She thought about the diner, about Carl's red face and the way he had pointed at the door like she was something dirty he wanted swept outside. She thought about the customers who had watched and said nothing. "I have no money," she whispered to the empty room. "No job, no plan." But then she looked over at Emily, curled up on the other bed, breathing slow and even for the first time in who knew how long. And something in Lena's chest loosened, just a little. Whatever else had happened, whatever she had lost, she had gotten something back, too. Something she thought was gone forever. She was still sitting there, turning all of it over in her mind, when she heard the sound. At first it was faint, like distant thunder rolling across a flat sky. Lena tilted her head, listening. The sound grew, low and rumbling, closer and closer, until the windows of the motel room began to hum with it. Emily stirred, blinking awake. "What is that?" Lena stood and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain. She could not believe what she saw. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. No, more than dozens. Rows and rows of them. Engines growling, chrome flashing in the early morning sun, stretching down the road as far as she could see. Riders in leather vests, patches on their backs, helmets catching the light. They rolled in like a river of steel and thunder, filling the parking lot of the Highway Star Diner across the street. "Lena," Emily said, her voice small. "Are they here for me?" Lena didn't answer right away. Her hands trembled against the curtain. She thought of Wade, of his quiet promise the night before, of the way he had looked at Emily like she mattered more than anything else in the world. "I think," Lena said slowly, "they might be here for both of us." They dressed quickly and walked across the street, Emily gripping Lena's hand the whole way. The diner parking lot was packed with motorcycles, engines cutting off one by one until the morning went quiet, except for the creak of leather and the shuffle of boots on gravel. 200 riders, maybe more, stood together, filling the lot and spilling onto the sidewalk. The townspeople who had gathered to watch stood frozen, some backing away, some staring with wide, nervous eyes. Word had already spread about what happened the night before, about Lena getting fired, about the biker who had walked into the diner soaked and bleeding. Carl came storming out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron, his face twisting into a scowl the moment he saw the crowd. "What is this?" he barked, standing in the doorway, like he could hold back an army with his own 2 hands. "You can't park all these bikes here. This is private property." Wade stepped forward from the crowd, calm as still water. "We're not here to cause trouble," he said. "We came to eat breakfast, and we came to thank somebody." Carl's eyes darted past Wade to Lena, standing at the edge of the lot with Emily still holding her hand. His face went red. "She doesn't work here anymore," Carl snapped. "I don't care how many bikes you brought. She is not welcome back inside this diner. Not now, not ever." A murmur rolled through the crowd of riders, but nobody moved to argue. They simply began walking past Carl, one after another, filing quietly into the diner, taking seats at booths and counters, filling the small building until every chair was taken, and men lined the walls. Carl stood in the doorway, sputtering, his face twisted with fury as the bikers thanked Lena with nods and quiet words on their way past her, leaving her standing outside in the morning light, unsure of what would happen next. Lena did not go inside the diner. She stood there a moment longer, watching Carl's mouth move without sound, watching the bikers fill the little building like water filling a cup. Then she felt Emily tug gently on her hand. "Can we go back?" Emily whispered. "It's a lot of people." Lena nodded. She understood. After what Emily had been through, crowds probably felt like danger, not comfort. They walked back across the street to the motel, leaving the rumble and the noise behind them. The motel room was small and plain. 2 beds with scratchy blankets, a television that only got 3 channels, a bathroom with a leaky faucet that dripped no matter how tight you turned the handle. But it was quiet. And for now, it was theirs. Wade came by an hour later, still smelling like rain and road dust, and told Lena that a woman from the county child welfare office would need to speak with Emily soon. There were forms to fill out, questions to answer. Since Emily had run from her last foster placement, there were rules about what came next. "They're not going to just let her stay with a stranger," Wade said gently, "even if that stranger is her sister." "I'm not a stranger," Lena said, sharper than she meant to. Wade held up his hands. "I know that. You know that. But paperwork doesn't know anything yet. It'll take time." So they waited. Lena spent the next 2 days sitting with Emily in that small room, ordering food from the diner down the road that was not the Highway Star, watching cartoons Emily was probably too old for, but seemed to find comfort in anyway. Slowly, carefully, the 2 of them began to talk. Really talk. It happened on the 2nd evening. Emily was picking at the crust of a sandwich, not really eating it, just breaking it into smaller and smaller pieces. "You know, I thought about you every year on my birthday," Emily said quietly, not looking up. "I used to think maybe you'd show up. Maybe you'd remember." Lena's throat tightened. "Emily, I didn't know where you were. Mom told me you got adopted. She said you had a good family, a nice house, that you were happy. I believed her." Emily's hands went still. "That family gave me back." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. "What?" Lena whispered. 2 years after the adoption, Emily said, her voice flat, like she had told this story so many times it no longer hurt to say, only to feel. "They said it wasn't working out. They said I had attachment issues. Like it was something wrong with me instead of something that happened to me." She finally looked up, and her eyes were dry, but old in a way that broke Lena's heart. "After that, I went into 3 different foster homes. None of them stuck. I stopped hoping anybody would want to keep me." Lena reached out and took Emily's hand, holding it like it might disappear if she let go. "Emily, I am so sorry. I should have looked harder. I should have asked more questions. I trusted the wrong person, and you paid for it." "It's not your fault," Emily said, though her voice wavered like she wasn't sure she believed it either. "It doesn't matter whose fault it is," Lena said. "What matters is I know now, and I am not letting you go again, not ever." Emily's chin trembled, and for the first time since Lena had found her hiding in that old bus, she let herself cry. Not the quiet, careful tears of someone who had learned not to ask for comfort, but big, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and long buried. Lena wrapped her arms around her sister and held on tight, rocking her gently the way she imagined a mother would, though nobody had ever done it for her either. She thought about all those years Emily had spent believing she was forgotten, unwanted, tossed aside like something broken beyond fixing. All those birthdays with no card, all those nights in strange houses, waiting for someone who never came. "I'm here now," Lena whispered into her sister's hair. "I'm here, and I'm not leaving." Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the motel parking lot in shades of orange and pink. But inside that small room, wrapped in each other's arms, neither sister noticed the sky at all. The next morning, Wade showed up at the motel with a paper bag full of biscuits and a woman named Rosalie riding behind him on his bike. Rosalie was maybe 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a tight braid and forearms that looked like she had spent a lifetime doing hard work. She was not a Hell's Angel herself, but she was married to one, and she had spent years volunteering with the club's youth outreach program. "I hear you like cartoons," Rosalie said to Emily, setting the bag of biscuits on the small motel table. "I brought you something better than the 3 channels this old television gets." She pulled out a stack of paperback books, worn soft at the edges, the kind of books that had been read many times by many hands. Emily stared at them like she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch them. "Go on," Rosalie said. "They're yours now." That was how it started. Over the next several days, the club showed up in small ways, never all at once, never overwhelming. A man named Diesel, who had arms covered in faded tattoos and a laugh that shook the walls, brought a toolbox and fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom without being asked. A woman named Patch, who rode with her own husband in the club, taught Emily how to braid her hair in a new way, sitting cross-legged on the motel bed like they were old friends. Wade came every day. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes he just sat outside on the curb with Emily while Lena napped, teaching her small things. How an engine worked, how to change a tire, how to check the oil in a car so nobody could ever tell her she didn't know how to take care of herself. "Why do you do all this?" Emily asked him one afternoon, watching him wipe grease off his hands with an old rag. Wade thought about the question for a long moment before he answered. "Because a long time ago somebody did it for me, and I promised myself I'd pass it along." He didn't explain further, and Emily didn't push. But something in his voice told her it was true, and something in his eyes told her he understood what it felt like to be forgotten. Slowly, Emily's shoulders started to relax when the bikers came around. She stopped flinching when the door opened. She started asking questions, real questions, about the club, about the road, about Wade's life before he became the man who found her behind an old bus. She even smiled once, a small crooked smile, when Diesel told a joke about a raccoon that had once tried to steal his sandwich during a ride through the mountains. Lena watched all of this from the doorway of the motel room, grateful and amazed at how these men and women, who most people crossed the street to avoid, were slowly rebuilding the trust that years of broken homes had torn apart in her sister. But even as she watched Emily heal, something inside Lena grew heavier every day. She kept thinking about the years she had lost, the birthdays she had missed, the nights Emily had spent alone in strange houses while Lena had gone on with her own life, believing a lie because it was easier than asking hard questions. One night, after Emily had fallen asleep with one of Rosalie's books still open on her chest, Lena sat on the edge of her own bed and let the guilt wash over her like a cold tide. She should have called. She should have visited. She should have demanded to see her sister with her own eyes instead of trusting her mother's word. Instead, She had let Emily disappear into a system that swallowed children whole and spit them back out broken, and she had gone on serving coffee and refilling ketchup bottles like nothing was wrong. Watching Emily laugh with Diesel over a joke felt like a gift Lena hadn't earned. Watching her trust Wade, a man she'd known for only days, felt like proof that Lena herself had failed at something Wade had somehow gotten right without even trying. She pressed her hand against her mouth to keep the sound of her crying from waking Emily, and in the dark, quiet room, the guilt sat heavy on her chest like a stone she did not know how to put down. The next morning, Lena woke up before the sun and lay still for a while, listening to Emily breathe in the bed beside her. It was a small sound, steady and soft, and it filled Lena with a strange kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. She got up quietly and made coffee in the little motel pot, the kind that only made 2 cups at a time, and tasted faintly of plastic no matter how many times you ran water through it. She poured 2 cups anyway, and by the time Emily stirred awake, the room smelled warm and bitter and familiar. "Morning," Emily mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Morning," Lena said. "I made coffee. It's not good, but it's hot." Emily took the cup with both hands and sat up against the headboard. For a while, neither of them said anything. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway, and somewhere far off a rooster crowed like it didn't know it was already too late in the morning to matter. "Do you remember the treehouse?" Emily asked suddenly. Lena blinked. "What treehouse?" "At Grandma's old place. There was that big oak tree in the backyard, and Dad built us a platform up in the branches. You used to climb up there and read to me because I was too scared to go up by myself." Lena felt something shift in her chest, a memory rising up like it had been buried under years of dust. "I remember that. You wouldn't go up unless I went first." "You always went first," Emily said quietly. "Every time." They spent the rest of the morning like that, trading memories back and forth like they were passing a candle between them, each one lighting up a little more of the dark. They talked about the summer Lena taught Emily to ride a bike in the church parking lot, scraping her knee so many times their mother started keeping bandages in her purse just for outings. They talked about the Halloween they dressed up as matching ghosts because their mother couldn't afford 2 different costumes, and how they had laughed so hard at their own reflections in the hallway mirror that they had to sit down. Lena made lunch out of what little the motel kitchenette offered, canned soup heated on the small stove, and crackers from a box Rosalie had left behind. They ate sitting cross-legged on the floor, plates balanced on their knees, and Emily told her about the group home before the last foster family, the one with the mean older boy who used to steal food from the younger kids' plates. "I used to hide bread in my pillowcase," Emily admitted, "in case he took my dinner again." Lena's throat tightened, but she didn't cry. She just listened, the way she used to listen to strangers at the diner counter, letting the words land without flinching, letting Emily know it was safe to say hard things out loud. "I'm sorry," Lena said finally. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I should have found you sooner. I should have never believed Mom when she said you were doing fine." Emily was quiet for a moment, turning her spoon over in the empty soup bowl. "I used to think you didn't want me," she said softly. "I used to think maybe I did something wrong, and that's why you never came." "That's not true," Lena said, her voice breaking. "None of that is true. I didn't know. If I had known, I would have moved heaven and earth to get you back." Emily looked up at her, and for the first time since Wade had found her behind that old bus, her eyes didn't look guarded. They looked open, tired, but open. "I don't need you to be perfect, Lena," she said. "I never needed that. I just needed someone who would choose me, Somebody who would look at me and decide I was worth staying for. Lena reached across the small space between them and took her sister's hand, holding it the way she used to hold it years ago, back when Emily was small enough to need help crossing the street. "I choose you," Lena said. "I choose you every single day from now on. I promise you, Emily, I will always be there. No matter what happens next, no matter how hard it gets, I am not going anywhere. You will never have to wonder again." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. A real smile this time, the kind that reached all the way up into her eyes. A knock came at the motel door just after 2 in the afternoon, soft and hesitant, like whoever stood outside wasn't sure they should be there at all. Lena opened it to find Harold Bennett standing on the cracked concrete walkway, holding his old cap in both hands. He looked smaller outside the diner, out of his apron and away from the grill, like a man who had stepped out of a photograph from another time. His white hair was combed carefully to one side, and his eyes, usually calm and steady when he flipped eggs and poured batter, looked nervous now. "Harold," Lena said, surprised. "What are you doing here? How did you even find us?" "Rosalie," he admitted. "She still talks to Wade, and Wade told her where you two were staying. I hope that's all right. I wouldn't have come if it wasn't important." Lena stepped aside and let him in. Emily sat up on the bed, watching the old man with curious eyes as he lowered himself into the room's only chair, his knees cracking like dry branches. "Can I get you some coffee?" Lena asked. "It's not very good, but it's hot." Harold managed a small smile. "I've had worse. Made most of it myself, actually, over the years." Lena poured him a cup anyway, and sat down across from him on the edge of the bed. For a moment, Harold just held the cup, staring into it like the answer to something was floating there. "I need to tell you something," he said finally. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Lena waited, her hands folded in her lap. "I own half of the Highway Star Diner," Harold said. The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. Lena blinked, certain she had misheard him. "What?" "It's true," Harold said. 22 years ago, when the original owner passed away, he left the diner to be split between 2 people. Carl got one half, I got the other. I never wanted my name on anything. I never wanted people looking at me different, treating me like a boss instead of the cook. So I let Carl run things. I let him put his name on the sign. I let him make all the decisions. Lena felt something twist in her stomach. "You knew," she said slowly. "This whole time, you knew how he treated people, and you had the power to stop it." Harold's eyes dropped to the coffee cup in his hands. "Yes," he said, his voice quiet with shame. "I knew." Emily shifted on the bed, watching the 2 of them, but she stayed silent, sensing this was not her moment to speak. "Why didn't you do something?" Lena asked, and though her voice was gentle, the question cut deep, the way only an honest question can. Harold was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice trembled slightly, the way an old floorboard creaks under weight it isn't used to carrying. "I've spent my whole life avoiding trouble," he said. "My daddy used to say the loudest man in the room always wins, and the quiet man just has to learn to live with what's left over. I believed that for a long, long time. Every time Carl raised his voice at a young waitress, every time he cut somebody's hours out of spite, every time I saw the fear in somebody's eyes when he walked in the door, I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I told myself I was just the cook. I told myself staying quiet was the same as staying safe." He looked up at Lena then, and his eyes were wet. "But watching you," he continued, "watching you get thrown out that night for doing nothing but showing kindness to a stranger, and watching you stand back up again anyway, without turning bitter, without turning hard. It did something to me, Lena. It made me ashamed of every year I spent staying silent. Lena reached out and placed her hand over his, the way she had done for so many strangers at that diner counter, the way she had done for Emily just that morning. "You're not silent now," she said softly. Harold nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. "No," he said, straightening in his chair, some old strength returning to his shoulders. "Not anymore. I've been quiet long enough. It's time I finally do something about it." Harold set down his coffee cup and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded manila envelope, soft at the edges from being carried around too long. "I've been keeping records," he said. "For years, actually. I never knew what I'd do with them. I guess some part of me always hoped I'd find the courage before it was too late." He handed the envelope to Lena. She opened it slowly, her fingers unsure, and found pages of handwritten notes. Dates, names, numbers. "What is this?" "Proof," Harold said. "Carl's been shorting paychecks for years, taking hours off the books, paying people less than what he told them he would, and pocketing the difference. I kept track of it because I didn't trust him with the register receipts. Old habit. Never thought I'd use it against him." Lena scanned the pages. She saw her own name near the bottom of one sheet, a date from 3 months ago, a number that didn't match what she remembered being paid. "He shorted me too," she said quietly. "He shorted everybody," Harold said. "Rosalie, the dishwasher, Thomas, even that boy who worked the register 2 summers ago, the one who quit without telling anybody why. Carl liked to say people were lucky to have a job at all. He liked using fear to keep folks quiet." Emily leaned forward from the bed. "Can you do something with that, like take it to somebody?" "That's what I'm asking myself," Harold said. He looked at Lena. "But it's not really my decision alone. This affects you too, maybe more than anybody." Lena set the envelope down on the small motel table. She stared at it like it might bite her. "I don't know, Harold," she said. "I don't want to become someone who tears another person down. I saw what Carl did. I don't want to become him." "This isn't the same," Harold said gently. "Isn't it?" Lena stood up, pacing the small space between the bed and the window. "He humiliated me in front of a whole room of people. Now I'm supposed to gather evidence and expose him? Take away everything he has? How is that different from what he did to me?" Harold watched her for a moment before answering. "Because he did it out of cruelty," he said. "You'd be doing it out of truth." Lena stopped pacing. "Carl hurt people because he liked having power over them," Harold continued. "He liked watching folks flinch when he walked in the room. That's not justice, Lena. That's just meanness wearing a badge. What we'd be doing is different. We wouldn't be trying to hurt him. We'd be trying to stop him from hurting anybody else." Lena crossed her arms, still uncertain. "It still feels like revenge." "Revenge is wanting somebody to suffer because they made you suffer," Harold said, his voice steady now, the shakiness from earlier gone. "Justice is making sure the truth gets told, so the suffering stops. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like it in the moment." Emily spoke up again, her voice small but clear. "Lena, you always told me that pretending something isn't true doesn't make it go away. You said that to me the first night, remember? When I didn't want to talk about the group home." Lena turned to look at her sister, surprised the girl had been listening so closely. "I remember," she said softly. "Maybe this is the same thing," Emily said. "Maybe if nobody says anything, Carl just keeps doing what he's doing. Maybe somebody else gets hurt like you did, or worse." Lena sat back down slowly, the weight of the envelope somehow heavier now than before. "I don't want to do this because I'm angry," she said. "I don't want it to be about getting back at him." "Then don't let it be," Harold said. "Let it be about everybody he's hurt over the years who never had the courage to speak up. Let it be about the next Lena who walks through that door and gets treated the way you were treated. You have a chance to stop that from happening again." Lena looked down at the papers spread across the table. The names, the numbers, the small proof of years of quiet cruelty. She thought about the customers who had stayed silent the night she was fired. She thought about herself, staying silent for years about so many things. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady. "Let's do it. Let's tell the truth." Harold nodded, relief washing over his tired face. "Then we'd better start getting everything together the right way," he said. "If we're going to do this, we do it properly, no shortcuts." Word got out fast in a town this small. Harold had gone to 3 former employees that morning, asking quiet questions, gathering signatures on statements he'd written up himself. He was careful. He tried to be quiet about it. But quiet only lasts so long in a place where everybody knows everybody's truck. By noon, Carl knew. He stormed into the diner while Rosalie was wiping down the counter, his face red, a vein standing out on his forehead. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" he shouted at Harold, who was flipping eggs at the grill like nothing was wrong. "Going around town, digging up old papers, trying to make me look like a criminal?" Harold didn't turn around right away. When he did, his voice was calm. "I'm just telling the truth, Carl. That's all." "The truth?" Carl laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The truth is that girl brought a biker gang into my diner to threaten me. The truth is she's been planning this for weeks, probably had it planned since the night I let her go." Rosalie stopped wiping the counter. "Carl, that's not what happened, and you know it." "I know what I saw," Carl snapped. 200 bikers showing up at my diner. You think that's an accident? You think that's a coincidence? She used them to scare me, and now she's got Harold digging through old paperwork trying to make me look like the bad guy. He stormed out before anyone could argue further, but the damage was already moving through town like a spark catching dry grass. By that evening, the story had changed shape the way stories do when they pass from mouth to mouth. It wasn't about a scared teenage girl who'd been found safe. It wasn't about a waitress who'd given away a few free meals on a stormy night. It was about a woman who'd threatened a respected business owner with a violent motorcycle gang because she'd been fired for stealing. Lena heard the first version of it from Rosalie, who called her at the motel, her voice tight with worry. "He's telling people you used Wade and his club to intimidate him," Rosalie said. "Some folks are actually believing it, Lena. I heard Mrs. Callahan at the grocery store saying she always figured you were trouble, sneaking around, giving away food that wasn't yours to give." Lena sat on the edge of the motel bed, phone pressed to her ear, feeling something cold settle into her chest. "That's not what happened," she said, though she already knew the truth wouldn't matter to everyone. "I know that," Rosalie said. "But you know how this town is. People believe the story that gets told the loudest, not the one that's true." The next day, Lena walked into the grocery store to buy a few things for Emily, and she felt it immediately. The way conversations stopped when she walked past. The way old Mr. Fenwick, who used to wave at her every Sunday after church, looked away instead of meeting her eyes. The cashier, a girl Lena had gone to high school with, rang up her items without a single word, her mouth pressed into a thin line. By the time Lena got back to the car, her hands were shaking. She sat behind the wheel for a long moment before she trusted herself to drive. Emily noticed something was wrong the second Lena walked back into the motel room. "What happened?" she asked, setting down the book she'd been reading. "Nothing," Lena said, though her voice cracked on the word. "Lena." Lena sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. "People think I did something wrong," she said finally. "Carl's telling everybody I brought the bikers to threaten him, that I planned it, that I'm some kind of criminal." "That's not true," Emily said, her voice sharp with anger on her sister's behalf. "I know," Lena said. "But it doesn't matter if it's true. People are believing him anyway." She thought about the night she'd handed Wade a cup of coffee and a warm meal without asking for anything in return. She thought about every small kindness she'd shown over the years, every extra plate of food, every late-night conversation with a lonely traveler. Had all of that only led to this? To people looking at her like she was something dangerous? Something to be avoided? Lena pressed her hands against her eyes, feeling the weight of doubt creeping in where hope used to live. "Maybe kindness only makes things worse," she whispered, more to herself than to Emily. "Maybe I should have just kept my head down and stayed quiet, like everybody else." Emily was still fuming when someone knocked on the motel room door. Lena wiped her eyes and stood, unsure who would be knocking at this hour. When she opened the door, she found 3 people standing there. A woman named Dottie, who used to work the morning shift at the diner years ago. A young man named Miguel, who had bussed tables before he left for college. And an older man Lena barely recognized. Someone named Frank, who had cooked alongside Harold for a short time, before quitting suddenly 2 years back. "Can we come in?" Dottie asked, her voice quiet but steady. "We won't take much of your time." Lena stepped aside, confused but too tired to ask questions. They filed in, and Emily sat up straighter on the bed, watching them carefully. "We heard what Carl's been saying," Miguel started. "About you using the bikers to threaten him. It's not true, and we know it." "How do you know?" Lena asked. Frank cleared his throat. "Because we worked for him, too. Different years, different times, but the same man, the same cruelty." Dottie sat down in the chair by the small table, folding her hands in her lap. "Carl docked my pay once because I was 2 minutes late clocking in." 2 minutes, Lena. My car had a flat tire, and I still made it in only 2 minutes past my shift. He took an hour's wage from me like it was nothing. "He used to yell at me in front of customers," Miguel said. "Called me stupid when I messed up an order, even when it was his fault for scribbling the ticket wrong in the first place. I quit because I couldn't stand feeling small every single day." Frank looked down at his hands, his voice rougher than the others. "He fired my sister for taking too many bathroom breaks. She was pregnant, sick every morning. He didn't care. Said if she couldn't do the job, she shouldn't have taken it." Lena felt her throat tighten as she listened. She'd known Carl was harsh, known he had a temper, but she hadn't realized how many people he'd hurt over the years. "Why didn't anyone say anything before now?" she asked. Dottie looked at her with tired eyes. "Because we needed the paychecks. Because we were scared of what he'd do, who he'd tell, whether we'd ever get hired anywhere else in this town if he decided to make trouble for us. Carl's got friends, people who owe him favors." "But you," Miguel said, looking at Lena with something like admiration. "You were the only one who ever treated us like we mattered. You remembered my mom was sick and asked about her every single shift. You covered for me once when I made a mistake that could have gotten me fired, and you never told a soul. You gave me an extra plate of food the week my husband left," Dottie added softly. "Never made me feel ashamed for needing it." Frank nodded. "You were kind to everybody, Lena. Employees, customers, strangers passing through. Carl's trying to paint you as some kind of criminal, but we know better. We've watched you for years." Lena felt tears building again, but this time they were different. Not the cold, hollow tears of doubt, but something warmer, something like being seen. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "Carl's got the whole town believing his version of things." "That's why we're here," Dottie said. "We want to help. We're tired of staying quiet." Just then, Another knock sounded at the door. Lena opened it to find Harold standing there, his old cap in his hands, his expression serious but calm. "I heard you had company," he said, stepping inside when Lena waved him in. He looked around at the small group gathered in the cramped motel room, and something like relief passed over his face. "I've been collecting statements all day," Harold said, "from people who've worked for Carl over the years. Wage theft, verbal abuse, falsified records. It's enough to bring before the whole town." "What are you going to do with it?" Lena asked. Harold's jaw tightened with resolve. "I'm calling a public meeting, tomorrow evening at the community hall. Everyone in town will be there, Carl included, whether he likes it or not." He looked at Lena, his eyes steady. "It's time the truth came out, all of it. No more staying quiet." The community hall smelled like old coffee and floor wax. Rows of folding chairs filled up fast, and by 7 o'clock, every seat was taken. People stood along the walls. Lena sat near the front with Emily beside her, Harold on her other side, his folder of papers resting on his knee like it weighed 100 pounds. Carl stood at the front of the room in his best shirt, the one he wore for church and funerals. He looked calm. Too calm. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice smooth as syrup. "I know there's been talk going around town, ugly talk, and I think it's time we set the record straight." He looked right at Lena. "This young woman," he said, "used to work for me. I gave her a job when she needed one. And how did she repay me? By bringing a gang of bikers to my diner to scare my customers, to threaten my business." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some heads nodded. Others stayed still, watching. "I built that diner from nothing," Carl continued. "Worked my whole life for it. And now people want to tear me down over rumors and lies." He sat down, satisfied, like he'd already won. Harold stood up slowly. His knees creaked as he rose, and for a moment, he looked smaller than Lena had ever seen him. Then he opened his folder. "I've worked in that diner for 30 years, Harold said, his voice steady despite the tremble in his hands. "Longer than anyone in this room has known Carl Dawson. And I've stayed quiet too long." He pulled out a stack of papers. "These are pay records," he said. "Real ones, not the ones Carl kept for show. They show wages docked without cause, hours cut from paychecks, money that never made it to the people who earned it." He held up another paper. "This is a letter from a doctor, confirming that a former employee, 5 months pregnant, was fired for taking bathroom breaks, fired for being sick." The room went quiet. Real quiet. Dottie stood up from her seat. "He took an hour's wage from me over 2 minutes, she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I had a flat tire. I still came in." Miguel stood next. "He called me stupid in front of customers, more than once." Frank rose slowly, his hat in his hands. "My sister. Pregnant. He fired her like she was nothing." One by one, more people stood. A dishwasher who'd been shorted overtime pay. A waitress who'd been threatened with firing if she ever asked for a raise. A teenager who'd been yelled at so badly he cried in the walk-in freezer. Carl's face went from confident to pale. He stood up, sputtering. "This is a setup," he said. "They're all lying, every one of them." 30 years of lying? Harold asked quietly. "All of them? Lying the same lie?" The room stayed silent, except for the shuffle of feet and the soft sound of someone crying near the back. The mayor, who'd been sitting quietly at the front table, cleared his throat. "Mr. Dawson, given what's been presented tonight, the town council will need to review your business license. Effective immediately, you no longer have authority over diner operations pending investigation." Carl's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His shoulders sagged like something inside him had finally broken. People turned to look at Lena, waiting for her to say something. Maybe something sharp. Maybe something to finally make Carl feel as small as he'd made everyone else feel for years. Lena stood up slowly. Emily reached for her hand, but Lena squeezed it gently and let go, walking to the front of the room. She looked at Carl. Really looked at him. He looked old suddenly, tired, alone. "I don't want him to suffer," Lena said, her voice soft but clear enough for the whole room to hear. "I just want him to learn what he forgot, that people matter." A few people gasped. Someone near the back whispered, "After everything he did to her?" Lena turned to face the room. "Carl hurt a lot of people. That's true, and it needs to be fixed. But hurting him back won't fix what's broken. It'll just make more broken things." She looked at Carl one last time. "I hope you find a way to be better. I mean that." Carl said nothing. He just stood there, staring at the floor, as the weight of 30 years finally caught up to him. The meeting broke up slow, people gathering coats and bags, still talking in low voices about what had happened. A few stopped to squeeze Lena's shoulder on their way out. Dottie hugged her so tight, Lena almost lost her breath. Miguel shook Harold's hand like he was thanking a doctor who'd saved his life. Lena felt light, lighter than she had in weeks. She walked out into the parking lot with Emily's hand in hers, and the night air felt clean somehow, like the whole town had exhaled at once. "You were amazing in there," Emily said, looking up at her sister. "I mean it. Everyone was staring at you like you were somebody important." "I'm just me," Lena said, but she smiled anyway. It felt good to smile without something heavy sitting on her chest. Wade waited by his bike near the edge of the lot, arms crossed, watching them walk over. He didn't say much, but the look on his face said enough. Pride. Quiet and steady, like always. "Told you," he said. "Kindness always finds its way back around." For a few days, everything felt like it was finally falling into place. The town council started their investigation into Carl. Harold began sorting out what would happen to the diner. Lena helped Emily pick out a bedroom at the motel. Silly as that sounded, hanging up a string of paper stars they'd cut out together one evening while the television played reruns in the background. Lena let herself believe, just a little, that maybe the hardest part was over. Maybe now they could just be sisters. Maybe now they could just be a family, plain and simple, without anything else standing in the way. That belief lasted exactly 9 days. The knock came on a Tuesday morning, sharp and official, the kind of knock that made your stomach drop before you even opened the door. Lena wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened it to find a woman in a gray blazer holding a leather folder. A badge clipped to her belt that read, "State Family Services." "Lena Brooks?" the woman asked. "Yes," Lena said, her voice already tightening. "I'm Miss Alvarez with the state. I need to speak with you about Emily Brooks." Lena's whole body went cold. She stepped aside and let the woman in, glancing back at Emily, who had come out of the bedroom in her socks, hair still messy from sleep, eyes wide with confusion. "What's going on?" Emily asked. Miss Alvarez sat down at the small motel table without being asked, opening her folder like this was routine. Like this happened every day. Maybe it did, for her. "Emily's case is still open," she said. "Her legal guardianship was never finalized after the failed adoption. Until it is, she's technically still a ward of the state." "I know that," Lena said. "That's why I've been working with Harold and the lawyer to file for guardianship. We have the paperwork started." "I understand that," Miss Alvarez said, not unkindly, but firm. "But paperwork takes time. And in the meantime, our policy requires minors without an approved guardian to be placed in an approved foster setting. A motel room doesn't meet that standard." The words hit Lena like a slap. You're saying you want to take her?" Lena said slowly, Like saying it out loud might make it less true. I'm saying she may need to be placed elsewhere until the court finalizes your guardianship, Miss Alvarez said. It could be a few weeks. It could be longer, depending on how fast the paperwork moves. Emily's face crumpled. No, she said, her voice cracking. No, I'm not going anywhere. I just found her. I just found my sister. Emily, Lena started, but her own voice broke too. You said I was safe here, Emily said, tears spilling down her cheeks now. You said we were a family. We are, Lena said, reaching for her, but Emily backed away, shaking her head, arms wrapped tight around herself like she was trying to hold her own pieces together. Miss Alvarez closed her folder gently. I'm sorry, she said. And she did sound sorry, which somehow made it worse. I'll be in touch about the placement details. After she left, the motel room felt too small and too quiet. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, and Lena stood frozen by the door, feeling everything she'd fought for slip through her fingers like water she couldn't hold on to no matter how tight she squeezed. The morning came in gray and quiet. Lena hadn't slept much. She'd spent most of the night sitting at the little motel table, staring at a stack of papers that seemed to multiply every time she looked away. Emily was still asleep, curled up small under the blanket, her face finally peaceful for the first time since Miss Alvarez had walked out the door. A knock came at 7, softer this time. Lena opened it to find Harold standing there with a thermos of coffee and a folder tucked under his arm, his old eyes tired but sharp. Didn't figure you'd slept, he said, stepping inside. Brought coffee and something else. He set the folder on the table. Inside were copies of pay stubs, records from the diner, even old schedules showing how many hours Lena had worked without complaint, without ever once being late. What's this for? Lena asked. Proof, Harold said. Proof you're steady. Proof you show up. Judges like steady. They like proof more than promises. Before Lena could answer, the low rumble of a motorcycle engine rolled into the parking lot. Wade parked his bike near the door and walked in a moment later, holding a thick envelope in one hand. Letters, he said, setting it down beside Harold's folder. From the club. Fellas who've known Emily these past weeks. Fellas who watched her come out of her shell. Judges want to know a kid's got people looking out for her. Well, she's got 200 of us. Lena stared at the growing pile on the table. Pay stubs, letters, schedules. Proof of a life built one small, honest day at a time. It's not much, she said quietly, compared to what they usually look for. A house, a yard, 2 parents. It's not about what you don't have, Harold said, sitting down across from her. It's about what you do have. You've got a job, a place to stay, temporary as it is. People willing to stand up for you. That's more than a lot of families walking into that courtroom today. Emily stirred in the bed, sitting up slowly, hair sticking up on one side. She looked at the 3 of them gathered around the little table like they were building something out of nothing. And maybe they were. Is that all for me? She asked, voice still thick with sleep. All for you, Wade said, and something in his rough voice cracked just slightly, like even a man built out of leather and road dust could feel the weight of a scared kid's question. Lena stood up and crossed the room, kneeling by the bed so she was eye level with her sister. I know you're scared, she said. I'm scared too, but I am not giving up on you, not today, not ever. Emily's chin trembled, but she nodded. Harold cleared his throat, tapping the folder. Now courtroom's not until 10. That gives us time to organize this properly, make sure nothing's missing. Judges like things neat. They spread the papers across the table, sorting them by date, by importance, Wade holding pages up to the window light to check for smudges. Harold writing little notes in the margins about which letter to lead with. It was slow work, careful work, and somewhere in the middle of it, Lena noticed her hands had stopped shaking. She looked around the room. A retired cook who'd spent decades keeping quiet, finally speaking up. A biker who wore his heart plain as day, despite looking like trouble to anyone who didn't know him. A little sister who'd survived years of being forgotten, still brave enough to hope for a home. Lena realized something as she smoothed the last page into place. She wasn't the same waitress who'd been humiliated in front of a diner full of strangers. She wasn't the same woman who'd walked away that night carrying nothing but a box and a broken heart. She had people now. She had proof. She had a reason to fight harder than she'd ever fought for anything. "Okay," she said, standing straight, feeling something steady settle into her chest like a stone finding its place at the bottom of a river. "Let's go get my sister." Harold smiled. Wade nodded once, firm and sure. Lena picked up the folder, holding it tight against her chest, and for the first time in a long while, she did not feel powerless at all. The parking lot outside the courthouse was mostly empty when they arrived, just a few cars scattered across the cracked asphalt and one lonely flag hanging still in the morning air. They were early. Harold had insisted on it. "Never walk into a courtroom rushed," he'd said. "Rushed people look guilty even when they've done nothing wrong." So they sat on a bench outside, the folder resting on Lena's knees, Emily beside her picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. Harold had gone to find a vending machine for water, leaving Wade standing near the steps, arms crossed, watching the road like he was waiting for trouble that never came. "Wade," Lena said, "can I ask you something?" He turned, and for a moment his face looked older than 45, like the years had settled heavier on him than usual. "Go ahead." "Why do you care so much? About Emily? About me? You didn't know either of us a month ago." Wade walked over and sat down on the bench, the wood creaking under him. He was quiet for a while, long enough that Lena thought maybe he wouldn't answer at all. "I had a daughter once," he finally said. "Name was Sarah. She'd be about your age now, Lena, if things had gone different." Lena's breath caught. Emily looked up from her sleeve, listening close. "She got sick when she was 7, Wade continued. "Fever that wouldn't break. We didn't have insurance back then. I didn't have the club yet either. Didn't have brothers to call on. Just me and her mother driving from hospital to hospital, begging for someone to help us. By the time somebody did, it was too late." The words hung in the morning air, heavy and plain. Lena reached over and put her hand on his arm, but she didn't say anything. Some things didn't need words on top of them. "After she passed," Wade said, "I promised myself I wouldn't let another kid slip through cracks like that. Not if I could help it. That's how I ended up riding with men who feel the same way. We started small, just watching out for kids in bad situations. Kids nobody else was watching out for. Grew from there." Emily's eyes were wet, but she didn't look away. "I'm sorry," Emily said quietly. "About your daughter." Wade looked at her, and something soft moved behind his rough face. "Don't be sorry, kid. Just don't waste what she didn't get the chance to have. That's all I ask." Lena felt her own throat tighten. "Is that why you never gave up looking for Emily? Because of Sarah?" "Partly," Wade said, "but it's more than that now. Family isn't always blood, Lena. Sometimes family is just people who refuse to leave when leaving would be easier. Your mother left. Emily's first adopted family left. That diner owner, he'd have left too. First chance he got, if things had gotten hard for him instead of you. But you didn't leave. You went looking. Harold didn't leave either, not really, even when he stayed quiet all those years. He was still there, still watching, waiting for his moment to do right. And I'm not leaving. Not until that girl's got a home that's hers, truly hers, with someone who chose her. Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand. You make it sound simple? It is simple, Wade said. Just not easy. Simple and easy aren't the same thing. Harold returned then, 3 bottles of water balanced in his arms, and he must have caught the last of it because he didn't say anything, just handed out the water and sat down across from them like he already understood. Lena looked at the folder in her lap, then at Emily, then at Wade and Harold sitting there like 2 mismatched pillars holding up something fragile and important. She thought about all the people who had walked out of her life. Her mother. The years she'd spent believing Emily was better off without her. The customers at the diner who'd stayed silent while Carl tore her down. Then she thought about the people sitting beside her now. People who had shown up. People who kept showing up, day after day, without being asked twice. The courthouse doors opened at 9:45, and a woman in a gray blazer called their names from the top of the steps. Lena stood, smoothed her jacket, and took Emily's hand. Ready? Harold asked. Yes, Lena said, and she meant it all the way down to her bones. She walked up those steps with Emily's hand in hers, Harold on one side, Wade on the other, and for the first time since this whole thing began, she did not feel like a woman walking in alone to beg for something she didn't deserve. She felt like a woman walking in with her family, ready to fight for the only thing that had ever truly mattered. The courtroom was smaller than Lena expected. No high ceilings, no dramatic wood paneling like she'd seen on television. Just plain walls, a row of folding chairs, and a judge behind a desk that looked like it belonged in an office, not a place where lives got decided. Judge Patricia Alvarez had kind eyes, but a face that gave nothing away. She reviewed the folder Harold had prepared, the letters from the club, the statement from Lena's landlord, the paperwork proving steady income from her new position managing the diner. She took her time. Nobody rushed her. Then she looked up and asked to speak with Emily directly. Lena felt her stomach drop. She squeezed Emily's hand once before letting go. Emily walked to the small chair beside the judge's desk, the same kind of chair Lena remembered from her own school days, metal legs and a hard plastic seat. Emily sat straight, hands folded in her lap, and for a moment Lena worried she might freeze up the way she used to when strangers asked her questions. She didn't. Emily, the judge said gently, can you tell me what your life was like before you came to stay with your sister? Emily glanced at Lena, just for a second, like she was borrowing courage. Then she looked back at the judge. It was lonely, she said. I moved around a lot. Different houses, different rooms that never felt like mine. I learned not to unpack all the way, because I figured I'd be leaving again soon. Sometimes I was right. The judge nodded, writing something down. Were you afraid? All the time, Emily said. Afraid nobody wanted me. Afraid I did something wrong to make my mom leave, and then my adopted family leave too. I thought maybe something was broken in me. Lena felt her eyes burn. She pressed her lips together and stayed quiet, letting Emily's words fill the room on their own. And when you found out Lena was your sister, the judge asked, what did that feel like? Emily was quiet for a moment. Scared at first. I didn't know if she'd want me either. I thought maybe she'd look at me and see a problem, something extra she didn't need. She'd already lost her job because of me and Wade showing up. But that's not what happened, the judge said. No, Emily said, and her voice cracked just slightly. She looked at me like I was something she'd been missing her whole life. Nobody ever looked at me like that before. Not once. The courtroom was silent, except for the soft scratch of the judge's pen. She stayed, Emily continued. Even when things got hard, Even when that Carl guy spread lies about her. Even when it would have been easier to just let me go back into the system and keep her life simple. She fought for me. Nobody's ever fought for me before. Lena wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, not caring who saw. Do you feel safe with her? The judge asked. Safest I've ever felt, Emily said without hesitating. She's not just my sister. She's my home. The judge set down her pen and looked at Emily for a long moment, something soft passing over her professional expression. Thank you, Emily. You can go sit back down. Emily walked back to her seat, and Lena reached out and pulled her into a hug before she'd even fully sat, holding on to her tight, not caring if it wasn't proper courtroom behavior. The judge looked through the folder one more time, then addressed the room. I've reviewed the documentation, the character statements, and I've heard directly from Emily about her experience. It's clear to me that there is a genuine bond here, one built on trust and stability, which is exactly what this child needs going forward. She looked at Lena. Miss Brooks, I am approving your petition for guardianship of Emily. The paperwork will be finalized through the clerk's office, but as far as this court is concerned, Emily is going home with her sister today. Lena let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for years. Emily grabbed her hand and squeezed it hard enough to hurt. But Lena didn't let go, didn't want to let go. Not ever. Behind them, Harold exhaled loudly enough that a few people turned to look, and Wade sat with his arms crossed, jaw tight, blinking fast like a man who had waited a long time to see something go right. The drive back to the Highway Star Diner felt different than any drive Lena had taken before. Emily sat in the back seat of Harold's old truck, her forehead pressed against the window, watching the fields roll by like she was seeing them for the first time. Maybe she was. Maybe nothing looked the same to a person who finally knew where they belonged. Harold drove slow, both hands on the wheel, the way careful old men do. Nobody talked much. They didn't need to. The quiet in the truck wasn't empty. It was full. The kind of full that comes after something good finally happens. When they pulled into the gravel lot, the diner sign buzzed weakly against the afternoon sky, the same as it always had. Lena looked at it through the windshield and felt something twist in her chest. That sign had watched her get fired. It had watched her cry in her car afterward, not knowing what would happen next. Now it watched her come back with a sister who belonged to her, official and forever, papers signed and everything. Harold parked and shut off the engine. For a moment, nobody moved. Go on in, Harold said gently. I put a fresh pot of coffee on before we left. Should still be warm. Emily climbed out first, stretching her legs, looking around the parking lot like she was memorizing it. Lena followed slower, her hand brushing the truck door, and then she stopped, just for a second, staring at the diner's front window. She could still see it. That storm. That night. The rain hammering the glass so hard it sounded like fists, the bell above the door jingling, and Wade walking in soaked to the bone, blood on his hand, fear in his eyes even though his body looked like it could break down a wall. She remembered how her hands had shook pouring his coffee, not from fear of him, but from something else. Some instinct telling her this moment mattered, that the man in front of her needed more than a warm drink. He needed someone to look at him like a person instead of a threat. She hadn't known that small kindness would crack open her whole life. She hadn't known it would lead her back to Emily. She hadn't known Carl would explode the way he did, humiliating her in front of everyone, taking away the only job she had. She hadn't known 200 motorcycles would show up the next morning like thunder rolling across the highway, not to cause trouble, but to say thank you. She hadn't known any of it. She'd just been a waitress trying to do the right thing on an ordinary rainy night. You all right? Harold asked, stepping up beside her. Lena nodded slowly. Just thinking about how much started right here, in that dining room, over a cup of coffee and a busted hand? Harold smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. Funny how the big moments in life don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just walk in soaking wet and order coffee. Lena laughed, despite the tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. Yeah, sometimes they do. They walked inside together. Emily was already at the counter, spinning slowly on one of the stools like she used to do as a little kid. Like the diner was a place she could finally be young in. The smell of coffee and fried onions and old wood filled the air, familiar and steady. Harold walked behind the counter, poured 2 cups, and set one in front of Lena. She wrapped her hands around it, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. "You did good, Lena," Harold said. "Real good. Not just today in that courtroom. Every day since that storm. You didn't stop being kind even when the world tried to punish you for it." Lena looked down into her cup. "Sometimes I wondered if it was worth it. All the trouble it caused." Harold shook his head firmly. "It was never trouble. It was the truth finally getting the chance to breathe." He paused, studying her carefully, like he was deciding something he'd already made up his mind about. "That's why I want you to run this place, not just manage it. Really run it. Make the decisions. Set the tone." Lena blinked, caught off guard. "Harold, I don't know if I'm the one who should—" "You're exactly the one," Harold said, his voice steady and sure. "This diner needs someone who sees people the way you do. That's not just good business, Lena. That's the future of this place." Lena did not sleep much that first week. Her mind kept running like a motor that would not shut off, full of ideas she had carried for years without ever saying out loud. Now the diner was hers to shape, and she was not going to waste the chance. The first thing she changed was the sign by the door. For years it had said employees only beyond this point in sharp red letters, the kind of sign that made new workers feel like guests instead of family. Lena took it down herself, standing on a chair with a screwdriver, and Harold held the ladder steady, even though the sign was barely 3 feet off the ground. "What are you putting up instead?" he asked. Lena held up a piece of wood she had painted the night before at her kitchen table. It read, "Everyone who walks through this door matters." Harold smiled so wide his whole face wrinkled up like old paper. "Well," he said, "that settles that." She started with small things first. She told the cooks they could take their breaks whenever they needed them, not just when the schedule allowed. She raised the pay for the dishwashers, a quiet teenager named Marcus, who had been working there since he was 15, and never once complained even when his shoes had holes in them. She bought new shoes for him herself, left them in a box by his station with no note, because she remembered what it felt like to need something and be too proud to ask. The waitresses noticed the change before the customers did. Under Carl, they had been afraid to sit down even when the diner was empty, afraid to laugh too loud, afraid to be anything other than fast and silent. Lena told them the opposite. She told them if a customer needed someone to talk to, they should sit and talk. If a table was slow because somebody was having a hard day, that was fine. The food would still get made. The world would not end. Word moved through town slowly at first, the way water moves through cracks in the ground. People who had stopped coming to the diner because of how Carl treated the staff started showing back up, testing the place out like they weren't sure they believed the stories. A single mother named Rosa came in one afternoon with 3 kids and a face tight with worry about her bill. Lena waved off half the check without asking questions. Rosa cried right there in the booth, and Lena sat with her for 10 minutes holding her hand, not saying much, just being there. An old trucker named Gus, who had been coming through for 20 years and always ate alone in the corner booth, started sitting at the counter instead. Lena made sure someone always talked to him now, asked about his roots, remembered his stories. He told Harold one night that it was the first diner in the whole country where he didn't feel invisible. The Hells Angels came by often, not in a roaring pack like that first morning, but in small groups, 2 or 3 bikes at a time. They treated the diner like a second clubhouse. Wade would sit at the counter with Emily some afternoons, teaching her how card tricks worked or telling her stories about the road, and nobody in town flinched anymore when leather jackets walked through the door. The regulars had learned what Lena already knew. The scariest-looking people in the room were sometimes the gentlest. Harold stayed on as the cook, refusing to fully retire, saying he wasn't ready to give up his grill just yet. But he watched Lena run the front of the house with a pride that showed on his face every single day. He started calling her boss as a joke, and then one day he said it, and wasn't joking at all. By the end of the 2nd month, the diner looked the same on the outside. Same buzzing sign, same gravel lot, same chipped paint on the window frames. But inside, something had shifted for good. Strangers who walked in nervous, unsure if they belonged, found themselves staying longer than they planned, drawn in by something warm they couldn't quite name. People across 3 counties started calling it the diner where nobody eats alone. Truckers passed the story down the highway like a rumor worth believing. Mothers brought their children in just to see the sign by the door. Lena had built exactly what she always wished existed when she was young and scared and hungry. The Highway Star Diner had become a place where everyone was accepted, and nobody was judged. The morning of the anniversary came in soft and golden, the kind of early autumn light that made the gravel lot outside the Highway Star Diner look like it was dusted with tiny pieces of gold. Lena had been up since 5, not because she needed to be, but because her body still remembered the rhythm of all those years working double shifts, and some habits never really left you. She was refilling the ketchup bottles when she heard it, a sound like distant thunder, low and steady, rolling closer down the highway. Emily looked up from the booth where she was doing her homework, her pencil stopping mid-word. "Lena," she said, "do you hear that?" Lena walked to the window and wiped her hands on her apron. The sound grew louder, filling the whole valley until the first motorcycle crested the hill outside of town. Then another. Then dozens more. Then more still, until the entire highway was a river of chrome and leather and noise, flags snapping in the wind behind them. 200 Hells Angels rode into the gravel lot, just like they had that very first morning. Only this time nobody in town felt afraid. People stepped out of their shops and houses to watch, waving instead of hiding behind curtains. Kids ran to the edge of their yards to count the bikes. It had become something like a parade now, something the whole town looked forward to. Wade was at the front, same as always, his gray beard a little longer, his leather vest a little more worn. He swung off his bike with the same quiet strength Lena remembered from that stormy night so long ago, though his eyes these days carried less weight in them. He looked lighter somehow, happier. "Look at this place," he said, walking up the steps with his helmet under his arm. "Bet you never figured you'd be running it. Bet you never figured you'd be coming back with 200 bikes just for breakfast," Lena said, smiling. "Wouldn't miss it," Wade said. "None of us would." Behind him, the bikers filed in, filling up the booths and the counter, laughing and calling out orders, some of them reaching over to ruffle Emily's hair as she carried plates of pancakes to their tables like she'd been doing it her whole life. She had grown taller over the months, more sure of herself, moving through the diner with the same easy warmth Lena had always carried, like it was something passed down instead of something learned. Harold worked the grill with the same steady hands, flipping eggs and bacon fast enough to keep up with the crowd, humming under his breath the way he always did when he was happy. The whole diner rang with noise, laughter, silverware clinking, the hiss of the griddle, voices overlapping in every direction. It was loud in the best way a place could be loud, the kind of loud that meant nobody was sitting alone. When the rush finally slowed and most of the plates were cleared, Lena poured 2 cups of coffee and carried them outside to where Wade sat on the porch steps, looking out over the lot full of motorcycles gleaming in the sun. She sat down beside him and handed him a cup. "I never really got to say it properly," Lena said. "Thank you. For finding Emily. For everything you did that night, and every night after." Wade took the coffee and looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that held more than words usually could. "I didn't do the finding," he said. "Not really. You did that." Lena shook her head. "I didn't even know where to look until I told you those stories." "That's exactly what I mean," Wade said. "You gave a stranger a meal and a bandage on the worst night of your life, when you had every reason not to. That's where all of this started. Not with me, not with the club, with you." Lena looked out at the bikes, at Emily laughing with one of the riders near the door, at Harold's silhouette moving behind the counter through the window. "I was just being kind," she said quietly. "That's the thing about kindness," Wade said, watching the sunlight spread wider across the gravel lot. "It doesn't know it's starting something big. It just starts." They sat there for a while, not talking, just watching the morning settle over the lot. The coffee steamed between Lena's hands, and somewhere behind them, a biker laughed loud enough to carry through the screen door. It was a good sound. A sound that meant people were comfortable, that they belonged. "You ever think about that night?" Wade asked. "The storm?" "All the time," Lena said. "I remember how scared you looked when you walked in. Not scared of me, scared of not finding her in time." "I was," Wade admitted. "Been doing this a long time, looking for kids who disappear. You learn to carry the fear quiet, so it doesn't show. But that night it showed anyway." "I noticed," Lena said. "That's why I didn't turn you away." Wade smiled into his coffee cup. "Good thing you didn't, or none of this happens." They both looked out at the lot again. More bikers had wandered outside now, sitting on their bikes or leaning against the porch rail, some of them talking quietly, some just enjoying the sun. A few of the younger riders had pulled out a football and were tossing it back and forth in the gravel, careful to avoid the chrome. It didn't look like a motorcycle club anymore. It looked like a family reunion. The screen door creaked open, and Emily stepped out balancing a tray of empty coffee cups. She set them down on the porch rail and wiped her hands on her apron, the same way Lena always did, a habit she must have picked up without even noticing. "Harold says the biscuits are almost gone," Emily said. "He wants to know if he should make another batch or if people are getting full." "Make another batch," Wade said before Lena could answer. "This crew never gets full." Emily laughed, a real laugh, easy and light, nothing like the frightened girl who had once hidden under blankets in an abandoned bus, too afraid to trust that anyone was looking for her. She had grown so much since then, not just taller, but steadier. Like she had finally found solid ground to stand on after years of shifting sand. "I'll go tell him," Emily said, and then she paused, looking at Lena and Wade sitting together on the steps. "Hey, I'm glad you two are friends." "We're more than friends," Wade said. "We're family, all of us." Emily smiled at that, a smile that reached all the way to her eyes, and then she disappeared back inside, letting the screen door bang shut behind her. Lena watched her go, feeling something warm settle in her chest. She thought about all the years she believed Emily was safe somewhere else, living a better life, and how much guilt she had carried for not looking harder, not asking more questions, not fighting to find her sooner. She thought about the morning Carl fired her, humiliated her in front of the whole diner, and how certain she had been that her life was falling apart. It had felt like the end of everything back then, standing in that gravel lot with a box of her belongings, watching the only steady thing in her life disappear behind her. She had never imagined that losing her job would lead her here, to this porch, to this family, to a sister who called her home. Through the window, she could see Harold at the grill, flipping another batch of biscuits, his eyes crinkled with the same quiet contentment he always carried these days. He had spent so many years staying silent, letting Carl's cruelty go unchallenged because he was afraid of what speaking up might cost him. But in the end, his courage had given Lena everything. The diner, the chance to build something better, a place where nobody had to eat alone. Out in the lot, the bikers laughed and called to each other, their voices rising up into the golden morning air, blending with the sound of Emily's laughter drifting from inside the diner. Wade sat beside her, solid and steady, the same protector who had walked through that storm all those months ago searching for a girl he refused to give up on. Lena looked at all of them. Emily, Wade, Harold. The 200 riders who had once seemed like strangers and now felt like family stitched into the fabric of her life. She thought about the hardest night of her life, the night she thought she had lost everything, and understood now that it had been the beginning of everything she had ever truly needed. Lena set her coffee cup down on the porch step and let her mind drift back, all the way back, to the girl she used to be. The one who counted tips at the end of a shift and hoped it was enough for gas money. The one who smiled at strangers even when her own heart felt empty, because that was the only kind of wealth she had to give. She thought about Carl's face that night, red and twisted with anger, spitting words at her in front of everyone. Kindness does not pay the bills. She had believed him for a little while. She had walked out of that diner with a box of her things and a heart full of shame, certain that caring too much had been her downfall. Funny how wrong a person could be about their own life. She thought about the town meeting, how her hands had shook so hard she'd had to hold them together in her lap, while Harold laid out the truth about Carl's years of cruelty. She remembered the moment the room shifted, the way former employees stood up one after another to speak, their voices growing stronger with each story told. She remembered choosing not to crush Carl when she had the chance, saying instead that she only wanted him to remember that people mattered. She still believed that. Some days it was hard to hold on to, but she believed it. She thought about the courthouse, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the judge asking her questions about stability and love, and whether she understood what it meant to be responsible for another human life. She remembered Emily sitting beside her, gripping her hand under the table, and how badly she had wanted to promise her sister that this time, nothing would take her away again. When the judge finally said the words that made Lena Emily's legal guardian, she had cried right there in the courtroom, not caring who saw. And she thought about Harold, sliding the diner's ownership papers across the counter to her like it was nothing, like it wasn't the single biggest gift anyone had ever given her. "A business is built with people," he had told her. "And you're the only one who ever understood that." All of it had started with a stranger walking through a door during a storm. Lena looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once trembled with fear and shame, now steady, calloused from work she was proud of. She thought about how strange life could be, how a single night of kindness toward a frightened man could unravel into finding her sister, losing her job, gaining a family, and building something new out of the wreckage of everything she thought she had lost. The screen door swung open again, and this time it was Harold, wiping his hands on his apron, a tray of golden biscuits balanced in his arms. "Orders up," he called out. "You gonna sit there daydreaming, or you gonna help me feed this army?" Lena laughed and pushed herself up from the steps. "I'm coming, old man." Inside, the diner buzzed with warmth and noise. Bikers filled every booth and stool, their leather jackets slung over chair backs, their laughter rising over clinking forks and the sizzle of the griddle. Emily moved between tables with a coffee pot in hand, refilling cups without being asked, the same quiet attentiveness Lena had once been known for. She caught Lena's eye across the room and grinned. Wade sat at the counter, saving Lena's usual spot beside him. She slid onto the stool and picked up a rag, wiping down the counter out of habit, even though the diner was hers now and she didn't have to. "You ever stop working?" Wade asked, amused. "Not when there's family to feed," Lena said. She looked around the room, at the faces that had once been strangers and were now stitched so deeply into her life she couldn't imagine it without them. The bikers who protected forgotten children, the sister who had found her way home, the old cook who had finally found his courage, the man who had walked through a storm and never stopped searching. She grabbed a plate of eggs and biscuits and carried it to the nearest table, setting it down with a smile. "Here you go," she said. "Nobody eats alone here." And under the golden morning light spilling through the diner windows, surrounded by the family she never expected, Lena Brooks understood, at last, exactly what she had built. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.